I wanted to start this new series on the Promised Land, and that's lesson 1 is going to be the land of Abraham. And the reason I did is because of all the talk and everybody, all the different talking heads and people giving opinions about whose land is whose and who belongs where and who doesn't belong to this place and what are you to believe, and you hear so many different opinions. We as believers need to look at everything from a biblical standpoint, as far as I'm concerned. We need to go there first, and then we'll spread out from there. What we can't find in biblical, then we'll go out from there with different teachings and so on. For instance, when it comes to the Jewish people, if once you're the Torah, our Old Testament, which is the Jewish Bible, besides that you have a Mishnah and different places where you can go to look up more of their practices and so on, so you can find information. Another good source, as far as I'm concerned, is Josephus, who was a first century historian. He wrote 2 works in particular. He was a Roman citizen, and a lot of his material is good. In fact, I'll be quoting from him tonight with something we have here. Is a good place to look, or the first century historian Tacitus, different places like that. Anyway, I don't know that any of you ever want to look any of that stuff up. I have the works of Josephus, and I can tell you, you can fall asleep real good to reading his stuff because he goes on and on and on. If it's a paragraph worth of information, he'll do it in a chapter. He's kind of long-winded. But anyway, it's interesting to read. But tonight we're going to start with the Promised Land, and that's Tommy tried to say that for us. That's the Hebrew for Promised Land, is what that is, and you don't read it this way. The Hebrew you read this way. So in case you were confused, and that's what got you all in trouble when you were trying to read it the wrong way. So we're going to start with lesson 1 tonight, and it's going to be the land of Abraham. So we're going to start in Genesis. Genesis 12:4 says, "So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people he had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan." I underline that, the land of Canaan. "When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the site of Shechem." Some people say this Shechem, some people say it's Shechem. The Hebrew word is like you're clearing your throat when you get to the middle part of it, but it's Shechem is the way I always said it. "At the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land." So who was in the land at this time when Abraham came there? The Canaanites. What was the land called? Canaan. It's called the land of Canaan. Okay, so I've got some map to kind of take a look at the area over here. You can see Shechem right here. This is where, and Hebron down here. This is where Abraham wound up. This line shows you the route that he took as he left Ur of the Chaldees, and he came up here to Haran with his father Terah, and they stayed there for a while. His father died at 205 years old, and then God told him to go to the land I'll show you, and he left to go to Canaan, and that's where he wound up. This arrow is going down here because you remember at one time he went to Egypt for a while and then came back, but this is the land where he was. This is where he wound up. So Abram was born about 1960 BC. It was a long time ago. So what civilizations predated Abraham as he was at this time? And I put down here Mesopotamia, which is about 4,000 to 3,500 BC, and Egypt, which is 3,100 BC. You can see Mesopotamia was a little bit older. Some people considered it, the area here, the Sumerians, to be the oldest civilization, recorded civilization that we have. They instituted a lot of things that created what we call civilization. Now we're going to back up to the 11th chapter for a minute on Genesis 11th chapter, verse 31. It says, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, Haran's son, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. Now look what it says. What did it say? Where did it say they set out to go? That Terah set out to go? To the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years and died in Haran. Why did they set out to go to Canaan? Why did they stop in Haran? We don't know, because it doesn't tell us. It could have been that he was just plain worn out. That's a long way to travel. When you look back at where, let's see. You look back at where they started and you come all the way up to here, that's a long way to travel when you're 200 years old. Now, I don't know at 200 if I'm going to be in any kind of traveling condition. Anyway, they got there and he died there. Then Abram, as he was at that time, went on from there. So let's look at these two civilizations, because this has something to do with the land. Here is the land of Canaan. What's there now? What nation? Israel is the land that's there now. This, the Dead Sea here, up here is the Sea of Galilee. This is the Jordan River that ties them together. This is where Egypt is. This is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means between the rivers, or between rivers, between two rivers, depending on whose definition, but it means the same thing. It's between rivers. The rivers that it's between are the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it's where the Mesopotamian empire was. Not empire, it was not an empire. The area of Mesopotamia was here. And then over here you see Egypt. And then in between you see that's where Israel is today. What do you think made it where this area and this area would be a good place to start a civilization? Water. This one, you got rivers on both sides. You see, this is called the Fertile Crescent that you see here. So if you hear somebody refer to that as the ancient Fertile Crescent, that's what it is. It's the area of Mesopotamia all the way over into Egypt. And you see, Egypt grew up along the Nile River, and this area of Mesopotamia came up, this civilization came along between the Tigris and Euphrates River. Look where they had to go through. So it made this area where, and the only river here really was the Jordan River, and it was not a major river like Tigris and Euphrates or the Nile, but it was the river that was here. But there was something else made this a valuable place to be, and it's because of the trade routes. If you are in the Mesopotamian area, or if you were in Egypt and you were traveling to the other one for supplies or whatever, where did you have to go through? You had to go through the land of Canaan. So it made it for many, many years a trade route, if you will, between these two groups of people. Now, they didn't get in the car and go, so they didn't travel a lot. But when they did, they had to go through there in order to get there. Because if you're over here in Egypt and you say, well, I want to go to Ur of the Chaldees over here in Mesopotamia, and so you strike out across here, what are you in? You're in the desert. You'll die of thirst most likely before you ever get there. So they followed the routes that were more civilized and that had a place where you could water your livestock and water your animals and water yourself in order to get to the two places. Okay? So the land has a lot to do with what's going on now in Israel, in the areas around there. More so than what we would here. For instance, the land that I grew up on, lived on until we moved to Jacksonville, and I still have land out there. My mother and father owned it before we did, and his my grandmother owned it before he did, and she bought it from her great uncle, Altsy Brown. So that's been in the family for a long time. But we don't have any connection to the land past there because we don't know who lived on it before then. We don't have any idea. We don't know if it was cleared. We don't know anything about it. But this land has a history, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. You saw what it said, the Mesopotamia, the civilizations there grew up about 4,000 BC. That's 6,000 years. That's a long time. And then in Egypt has been there almost as long. So, Genesis 10:6, we're backing up a little further. Ham's son, Cush, Egypt. Now listen to this, his sons. Ham's sons, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Do they sound familiar? Cush's sons, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raymond. That's the best way I can do it. And Sabtica. And Raymond's sons, Sheba and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod, who was the first powerful man on the earth. We slip down and it says, he was a powerful hunter in the sight of the Lord. Down in verse 10 it says, his kingdom started with Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Okay, so where is the land of Shinar? And it's talking about this, so what does this man Nimrod have to do with anything we're going to be talking about? Now we go to Genesis 11:1. At one time, the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. Who settled cities in Shinar? Nimrod. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So they wanted to make themselves a city and a tower and make a name for themselves. And so where is Shinar? Here's the map again. This one's not labeled, but this is where Israel is. This is where Egypt is. This is the Sinai Peninsula. Over here is where Ur of the Chaldees is. And this land here is Shinar. So this is where these people settled, was the best we can tell, in this area. And if you want to look at it a little closer, the greatest consensus is this is where the Tower of Babel was. And where this city was here in just below the Euphrates River. It's where this was. And you can see the name of some of these. Some of these were like the ones we already named. And you can see it says the land of Shinar. Nimrod's Tower of Babel. It says Nimrod, who built the tower. It says they accredit that to him, and I'll show you why in just a second. So here's the Persian Gulf. Here's the rivers that run into there. And this is where the Tower of Babel was. Now, why is this important? In Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, he wrote Antiquities of the Jews and the Wars of the Jews. And this is out of Antiquities. It says, now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it was through his means they were happy. He wanted them to think the reason that they were getting along good and everything was good is because he was wonderful and he was a great ruler and all that. Does that sound like anybody that we know? Our politicians, I don't care which side of the aisle they're on, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do this for you. And the biggest thing I want to do is just get out of my way and leave me alone. Well, Nimrod wanted them to think that they owed him for everything that they had. They were having success because he was such a wonderful fellow. That sounds like a lot of them. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as it was through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny. What's tyranny? Tyranny is one ruler or a few people that are ruling over everybody else. The founders of our country, when they were coming up for a form of government for us, the thing that they looked at was they didn't want tyranny and they didn't want anarchy. Anarchy is when there is nobody there, you do whatever you want to, and tyranny is when you have somebody ruling over you, and they tried to find somewhere in between, and that's where they came up with our form of government. So anyway, change the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God. So he's trying to get them away from God, but to bring them into a constant dependence upon his power. Isn't that what politicians want to do? He also said he would be revenged of God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. For that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. So, this Nimrod, according to Josephus, a first century Jewish historian who was a Roman citizen, this is the reason he says the tower was built. That Nimrod wanted this tower built so that if God did flood the world, it didn't matter. They could get up on top of their tower and they'd be saved from this anyway, and he couldn't hurt them. That was good thinking, wasn't it? It didn't work out well. So, what happened to the people in Shinar after the confusing of tongues? Because we know that's what happened is God came in and says, we're not going to put up with this. So he changed it where they all spoke in different languages and couldn't understand each other. And so groups that could understand each other all gathered together in different places. So Genesis 11:8. So from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name is called Babylon. For there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scatters them over the face of the whole earth. Where did they go? Well, I'm going to give the next scripture I'm going to give it might not seem like it goes with this, but it's an incident that happened, and it'll give you an idea of where some of the people went. Genesis 14:8. Then the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and lined up for battle in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Okay, now here's the reason I'm bringing this up. This is the time when Lot and Abram, remember, separated ways because their livestock were having trouble getting along with the other one's livestock, and their servants were having trouble getting along. So anyway, they split. Went in 2 different areas. Lot winds up in Sodom and Gomorrah. Never tells us how he got there, why he got there, why he wound up there, if he got rid of all of his animals. Doesn't tell us anything. It's just he wound up there. Well, the kings that you see, the group of kings that you see, they came in, or the second group, they came in and they conquered these cities and took people captive, and Lot was one of them they took captive. And Abraham finds out about it, so Abraham sends to rescue them. Okay, this is just to kind of lay it down and give you an idea of where these people were and how all these people were scattered to different places. And the ones you see down here, Sodom, Gomorrah, Bela, which is Zoar, Admah, and Zeboim, all of those were the first ones that mentioned. Now this is where Lot was. And then if you look over here, I got a bigger map. It goes up over past the Sea of Galilee. It says Lake Gennesaret there, but that's what it was called back then. And you can see up here the other kings that it named are here, and this one is Shinar. They came from down over here, back over here if you were looking, and they came down here and through here and attacked these cities and took them captive and carried them back. Abraham was here. Abram was here, and he went up and he conquered them and brought all of everything back. So you see, all these people were scattered. They were in one place. They were over there in the land of Shinar. Then when God changed it, confused their tongues, you see cities and stuff. I don't remember if I put this in here or not. Yeah, I did. The next one says that. The areas around this that you were looking at that I was just showing you, you'll notice it had different cities and so on. We think of big nations, when we're thinking of place. Back then, in fact, the Greek Empire started out this way. It wasn't Greece, the whole area was Greece. It was city-states. A city would be its own state and the lands around it. And it was the same thing with these places, that there was many of them. Instead of, this would be one country today, but it was several different ones. Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, Admah, and Zeboim, they were all separate groups with a king. Each one had their own king, and the kings fought against each other. So when they were scattered out, they went around all these different areas. And this you can see with what we have here. I put down there was no country of Canaan. When you see the name Canaan, went to the land of Canaan. Canaan was not a country. That's like if you said North America. Is North America a country? No. South America a country? No. Is Europe a country? No. Is Asia a country? No. Well, it's the same thing here. Canaan was not a country. It was an area. So when they said went to the land of Canaan, that's what they meant. So we'll go back to Genesis 12:4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people he had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the site of Shechem at the oak of Moreh. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. So it says the Canaanites were in the land, and we just seen the Canaanites were not one homogeneous people. There were many different people. And I put a map here. This is kind of you can see all the different city-states that it has in this area. That would be the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, the Jordan River. And there was a lot of different civilizations, and over a period of time, these didn't necessarily all exist at the same time. Now, looking at that, now you look over here at where Israel is today and where the West Bank is in this area that was called Canaan at that time. It was not Israel. It was not Palestine. It was Canaan. It was the land of Canaan. Genesis 15:18. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring. What did God say to Abram? I give this land to you, to your offspring. From the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. All this land I'm giving to your offspring. Now, where is that land? It said from the river Euphrates to the brook of Egypt, which is right here. Here's Israel today. If you were to take that, what God said to Abram at that particular time, it would be from here, because there's the Euphrates, all the way to about halfway through the Sinai Peninsula. And look where Israel is. What did Abram say? What did God say to Abram? I give this land to your offspring. Now, there's reasons why they're not there, but that's a different lesson. Genesis 15:13. Then the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain. Your offspring will be foreigners in a land that does not belong to them. They will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. When did that happen? When did that happen? Huh? Before Moses, before Exodus. This happened when Jacob, who became Israel, when his family all moved to Egypt because of the famine that was going on, to the land of Goshen, and they lived there for 400, in one place it says, I think Hebrews says 430 years. But about 400 years, they were not in this land anymore, in the promised land, and he said it'd be 400 years, they'd be there. And then in the 16th verse it says, in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. We don't know what that means. Nobody knows what that means exactly, but whatever it did, God knew what he was talking about. But he said, your people, he was telling Abram out 400 years what was going to happen. He told they're going to be oppressed for 400 years and they won't be here. But they will return. Why didn't that change? There it is. Okay. Genesis 24:50. We're going to move forward a while. Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord. We have no choice in the matter." Verse 51. Rebekah is here in front of you. Take her and go and let her be a wife to your master's son, just as the Lord has spoken. Verse 54. Then he and the men with him ate and drank, spent the night. When they got up in the morning, he said, "Send me to my master." Who was his master? Abraham. Abraham was sent his servant to the land of Haran. In fact, I'll get this back up here. Here's all the way back up to Haran. Remember when I had it before down, if it was on the map, it'd be down here where Ur of the Chaldees was. They came from here and then settled in Haran, and then they came on down to here. Well, that's where his relatives were. So he sent his servant up here to get a wife for his son. He didn't want him marrying any of these Canaanite people because they were a bunch of idol worshippers and were not a nice group of people. So he didn't want them involved with them. So, well, you can tell how nice the countryside that was. How did Sodom and Gomorrah turn out? Not very good. So anyway, you can see this line shows him going up there and then coming back and bringing his wife back for Isaac. But where did they come back to? Same place, right here. Right beside the Dead Sea, over where it says Hebron on this. This is where he came back to. Why? This was the land that God sent him to. This is the land that God promised to him and his family. Genesis 35:27. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. 28th verse. Isaac lived 180 years. These fellas must have eaten good or something. I don't know. He took his last breath and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So they buried him. Here is where it says over here, Mamre and Hebron. This is where Abram settled. And Hebron comes in just a minute. And you can see it's right beside the Dead Sea. And if you look at it here, it's right here. In this area here. This is Israel today. And this is what it would be south of Jerusalem. It would be down in this area. And if you look at this, I put this one up here because this shows the travels of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it shows that Abraham started over here, Ur of the Chaldees, went to Haran, came all the way down here, came to this, went to Egypt for a while, came back. But this is where he wound up settling, was here. And if you look at the purple line, that's Isaac, his son. He wasn't much of a traveler, according to the Bible. Just a little bit in this area, but he stayed in this area. He was in this area. First generation, second generation, this area. Then if you look at the next one, the blue line, this is Jacob, who became Israel. And remember, they sent him to find a wife up in the land of Haran, same place where his mother came from, was still part of the family, had to marry within the family. And then he came back down here and he settled here. And he went over to Egypt, and he wound up in Egypt, and that's where he died, in Egypt, because that's where they were living, in the land of Goshen, because Joseph is the one that got him there, because he was the second in charge under Pharaoh. Okay? So you see all this coming together. We got Abraham, we got Isaac, we got Jacob. Let's go a little further. We're getting close to winding it down. Genesis 50:12. So Jacob's sons did for him what he had commanded them, what he commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field near Mamre, which Abraham had purchased as a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After Joseph buried his father, he returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone with him to bury his father. Now, I've got something I wrote here just so you know. Abraham bought this field from Ephron the Hittite. There they buried Abraham, Sarah his wife, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. Jacob also he said he was concerned about his burial site, and he mentioned that. He told him to carry him back. So he was buried in the same place here in Hebron. They were all buried in this same place. And Joseph, when he was approaching his death, if you look in the 50th chapter of the book of Genesis, he said, when you are set free, when you are go back to the promised land. He was looking 400 years in the future. He said, when you go to the promised land, he said, I'm going to be dead, but you take my body and you carry it back and you bury it in Canaan. Did he have an attachment or what? I don't care what you do with my body when I'm gone. But he said, you carry my body back with you. Burial place was important to the patriarchs because God promised the land to them and their seed. This is what God promised them. God promised the land to them, their seed. Jacob knew that if he was buried in Canaan, his tomb would forever remain within the promised land. The fact that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all were buried there, 3 generations, emphasized their belief in God's promise to give this land to their family. And here is the tomb or the building that they built there that they think is where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all their wives was buried, was in this place, and it's in Hebron. Where is Hebron? Here's Hebron, right here. Here's Israel. Here's the West Bank that they say is occupied territory. We'll talk about that later in a different lesson. But you can see that Hebron is not in Israel. It's in the occupied territory. It's in the territory that the Palestinians say belong to them. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all of them are buried here in Hebron. And you can see in this map, which shows back in the further back, this is where Mamre was. This is where Hebron was, where they were buried. Genesis 15:18. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring, from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. I give this to your offspring. You wonder why they take that land seriously? He told Abraham, I give this to your offspring. It's more than just a piece of dirt. It says, I give this land to you and your offspring. And that's the reason we started this one with the land of Abraham, the country of Abraham, the place that he was promised when God appeared to him. Any questions or comments?